Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter enchants us not only with spells and magical creatures, but also with J.K. Rowling's ability to surprise. She skillfully planted clues, misled readers, and at the most unexpected moment revealed the truth that made our hearts stop. Today we'll revisit the most striking plot twists that shook millions of fans. Let's begin. Number 1. Professor Quirrell. The first book in the series seemed almost naive compared to the sequels. The villain was supposed to be obvious, Professor Snape. Harry and his friends were certain it was he who sought the Philosopher's Stone. All the more shocking, then, was the truth. Behind the mask of the timid, almost pitiful Quirrell hid the real enemy. Attentive readers could spot the hints, for instance, Quirrell's presence in Diagon Alley on the day someone tried to rob Gringotts. Number 2. Scabbers, Peter Pettigrew. For a long time, Ron's rat was seen as nothing more than a comic background detail, but in the third book, the revelation came. Scabbers wasn't a pet at all, but a man, and not just any man, the traitor, Peter Pettigrew. This discovery shocked not only Harry, but also the readers, because with it collapsed the story of Sirius Black's guilt, who had been unjustly imprisoned in Azkaban. Number 3. Mad-Eye Moody, Barty Crouch Jr. In The Goblet of Fire, one of the most brilliant twists involved Mad-Eye Moody. Throughout the book, he seemed like Harry's ally, guiding him through the tournament and shielding him from danger. Yet in the finale, it was revealed that the real Moody had long been imprisoned, and for a whole year his identity had been stolen by Barty Crouch Jr. The clues were there all along, even in the odd scene with the Marauder's map, where Harry saw the name Barty Crouch. But almost no one guessed the truth. Number 4. Regulus Black. The name of Sirius's brother was mentioned only in passing, seemingly insignificant. But it was Regulus who first uncovered the secret of the Horcruxes and attempted to destroy one. For fans, this revelation was staggering. A former Death Eater had defied Voldemort himself. His story, hidden in the shadows, added yet another layer of tragedy to the saga of the Black family. Number 5. Snape, the Half-Blood Prince. The mysterious Half-Blood Prince remained an enigma almost until the end of the book. His notes helped Harry in class, yet they also led him to dark spells. When the truth was finally revealed, that the prince was Snape, the shock was twofold. Not only was it him, but his admission came mere minutes after Dumbledore's death. This moment cemented Snape's image as the enemy until we learned the full truth. Number 6. Snape's true devotion. Snape was always a dark, contradictory figure. He saved Harry while simultaneously despising him. He seemed loyal to Dumbledore, yet killed him himself. Only in the finale did we discover the real reason for his actions, his love for Lily Potter. Snape's memories became one of the saga's most moving revelations. His loyalty to Dumbledore and willingness to risk everything for Harry showed us that not everything in this world is black or white. Number 7. Harry is a Horcrux. From the very beginning, Harry had a strange bond with Voldemort, the pain in his scar, the visions, the Parseltongue. Dumbledore explained in the Chamber of Secrets that some of Voldemort's powers had been passed on, but only in the finale was the truth revealed. Harry himself had become a Horcrux. To defeat the Dark Lord, he had to give up his own life. This moment wasn't just a twist, but the point where the story turned into a tragedy and a test of true courage. Number 8. The return of Remus and Tonks in the forest. When Harry turned the resurrection stone in the Forbidden Forest, the dead walked beside him. His parents, Sirius and Remus, appeared, not as ghosts, but as shadows of love. "We never left," Sirius told him, while Remus added, "You'll stay with me?" Harry whispered, and they answered yes. It was a moment of unbearable sorrow and quiet strength. Remus, who had just left his newborn son behind, stood beside Harry, proving that even death could not silence loyalty. This return was more than comfort. It gave Harry the courage to keep walking toward Voldemort, unarmed and unafraid. Surrounded by the ones who had sacrificed before him, he felt part of a chain stronger than any curse. The twist reminded readers that the story was never just about spells and battles. It was about love that survived loss, friendship that defied time, and the strength the living draw from the dead when the moment of choice arrives. Number 9. Dumbledore and his secrets. For years, Albus Dumbledore stood as the flawless mentor in Harry's eyes. He was the man who always had an answer, the one who seemed to be 2 steps ahead of Voldemort. But Deathly Hallows shattered that image. Harry read Rita Skeeter's biography and learned of Ariana, the sister hidden from the world, whose uncontrolled magic ended in tragedy. She was a squib, Skeeter wrote, though Aberforth later revealed the truth, that Ariana's powers were too wild to be contained. The Dumbledore family was scarred by secrets and guilt. The greatest shock came with Gellert Grindelwald. Dumbledore's youthful friendship with the Dark Wizard felt like betrayal to Harry. The letters spoke of dreams to subjugate the Muggles for the greater good, words that sounded nothing like the headmaster he trusted. Aberforth's bitterness only sharpened the wound, accusing Albus of caring more for ambition than for family. Harry suddenly saw that his guide had once been blinded by the very hunger for power he warned against. And yet, the truth made Dumbledore more human. In the white limbo of King's Cross, he admitted his failings. "I was unworthy to be trusted with power," he confessed to Harry. This confession turned the twist into something deeper. The perfect mentor was gone, replaced by a man of brilliance and regret. Readers saw not just the mistakes, but the strength it took to rise above them. Dumbledore's secrets did not erase his greatness, they made it real. Number 10. Voldemort and Ollivander. Mr. Ollivander was first introduced as the eccentric wand maker of Diagon Alley, muttering, "The wand chooses the wizard," as he fitted Harry with holly and phoenix feather. For years, he seemed little more than a curious old man. But in Deathly Hallows, his role changed. After being rescued from Malfoy Manor, Ollivander revealed secrets that stunned both Harry and the readers. He spoke of the Elder Wand, the most powerful in existence, and explained why Voldemort was desperate to possess it. His words carried weight. "The Elder Wand cannot be overcome if its allegiance is won," he whispered, warning Harry of what Voldemort was chasing. This was not the gentle shopkeeper anymore, but a man who had studied the darkest depths of wand lore. Through Ollivander's knowledge, the final battle's stakes became clear. Voldemort's obsession was not madness. It was built on truths Ollivander had long known but never shared. By giving Harry and his friends this understanding, Ollivander shifted from background figure to keeper of the key. The legend of Antioch Peverell became more than a story because of his expertise. What once looked like harmless trivia about wand cores became the deciding knowledge in the war. A man who had once been a merchant of wands revealed himself as a guardian of hidden history, and in doing so changed the outcome of the wizarding world's greatest battle. Number 11. Neville, the hero of Hogwarts. Neville Longbottom began as the boy who lost his toad and forgot his password. He stumbled through spells and lived in the shadow of braver friends. Draco Malfoy mocked him. Even his own grandmother doubted his strength. But the Battle of Hogwarts revealed what had been hidden all along. When Voldemort offered mercy in exchange for surrender, it was Neville who stepped forward, battered and bleeding, and shouted, "I'll join you when hell freezes over." The timid boy had vanished. The real twist came when he drew the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat. Just as Harry once had in the Chamber of Secrets, Neville proved himself worthy of Gryffindor's greatest weapon. The hat burst into flame, and in his hand gleamed the silver blade. In that moment, the story of the clumsy boy found its climax. No prophecy named him, no destiny guided his steps, but courage alone made him a hero. Then he faced Nagini. The snake was Voldemort's last Horcrux, circling like a shadow of death. With a single strike, Neville swung the sword and severed her head. The creature that had haunted Harry's visions and protected Voldemort fell lifeless. It was dead before it hit the ground, rolling rights. In the chaos of battle, it was Neville's hand, not Harry's, that destroyed the Dark Lord's final safeguard. Neville's triumph was not just a victory over a snake. It was proof that greatness can grow from the unlikeliest soil. The boy who once quivered under Snape's glare became the man who stood unbroken against Voldemort. His arc was the quiet reminder that being a hero is not about prophecy or fame. It is about choice, and Neville chose to fight. Number 12. Harry's final sacrifice and his return. Harry's walk into the Forbidden Forest was the moment the story held its breath. He carried no wand raised, no shield in his hand. The snitch opened with the words, "I open at the close," and the resurrection stone brought Lily, James, Sirius, and Remus to his side. "We are part of you," his father said. It was not a duel, but a surrender. Harry offered his life so his friends could fight on. Readers felt the silence of that march more than any battle. The curse came swiftly. Voldemort lifted the Elder Wand, his voice cold. "Avada Kedavra!" Harry fell, and the world seemed to break with him. For a moment, it looked final. The hero had chosen death. The boy who lived had died. This was the kind of ending no one had expected, the kind of twist that stripped away hope in an instant. But then Harry opened his eyes in a place that was neither life nor death. King's Cross, white and endless, with Dumbledore waiting. Their conversation revealed the truth. Part of Voldemort's soul had been living inside Harry, and by striking him down, Voldemort had destroyed that piece of himself. "You are the true master of death, because you do not fear it," Dumbledore told him. The boy who had given up everything discovered he still had a choice. To return and finish what he started. When Harry rose again, the tide of battle shifted. His sacrifice had placed protection over everyone fighting against Voldemort, the same way Lily's love once shielded him. The Dark Lord could no longer harm them as before. Harry's death had not ended the fight. It had armed his friends with courage and stripped Voldemort of his last weapon. The twist carried both grief and triumph, proving that the greatest magic was not power, but sacrifice. Number 13. The story of Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle first appeared to Harry as a charming memory preserved in a diary. He looked like a model student, polite and clever, someone every teacher would admire. But the truth was chilling. "Ginny poured her heart out to me," the memory said, revealing how he fed on her fears and secrets. The diary was not a simple keepsake. It was a Horcrux, a piece of Voldemort's own soul. The boy who had once roamed the halls of Hogwarts had already begun the path to immortality. In Dumbledore's office, Harry saw more of Riddle's past through the pensive. He was an orphan in a grim London institution, already capable of cruelty. "I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me," young Tom told Dumbledore with a cold pride. The warning signs were there from the beginning. The boy who collected trophies from stolen objects would grow into a man who collected souls. It was not the sudden birth of a villain, but a steady decline into darkness. By the time he returned to Hogwarts as a student, Tom had already begun his obsession with legacy. He was the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets, releasing the basilisk that killed a girl named Myrtle Warren. "It was I who opened the Chamber of Secrets," the diary Riddle boasted to Harry. That revelation turned the mystery of the monster into something far more personal. The monster had a master, and that master was the boy who would become Lord Voldemort. What made this twist so powerful was its inevitability. Tom Riddle had once been a child like Harry, but he rejected love, friendship, and compassion. His brilliance twisted into arrogance, his loneliness into hunger for control. The handsome prefect turned out to be the darkest wizard of all time. Rowling did not just reveal a villain's origin, she told a warning. Greatness without humanity leads only to ruin. Number 14. The deathly Hallows are real. At first, the tale of the three brothers sounded like nothing more than a bedtime story. Hermione read it aloud from the tales of Beedle the Bard, and even Xenophilius Lovegood told them it was a symbol, not reality. But then the pieces began to fall into place. The cloak Harry had inherited from James was no ordinary invisibility cloak. Dumbledore himself admitted it was a cloak that is not only invisible, but resists spells and charms. Suddenly, what looked like fairy tale fantasy revealed itself as a real artifact passed down through generations of the Potter family. The Elder Wand was next. The moment Voldemort pried it from Dumbledore's tomb, the myth became flesh. "I have conquered death," Voldemort declared, raising the wand that had passed through centuries of bloody duels. Readers understood this was no ordinary weapon. Every duel that followed had a shadow over it, because the wand was said to be unbeatable. The legend of Antioch Peverell was no longer a tale, it was Voldemort's obsession. Then came the Resurrection Stone. Dumbledore had hidden it inside the golden snitch, leaving Harry the riddle. Eye open at the close, when Harry finally walked into the Forbidden Forest, he turned it in his hand and saw Lily, James, Sirius, and Remus standing beside him. "You've been so brave," said his mother. The fairy tale was no longer abstract. It gave Harry the courage to walk to his death. The stone, which once sounded like a fable, delivered the most intimate and heartbreaking scene in the series. By uniting the cloak, the wand, and the stone, Rowling transformed a childhood story into the spine of the final book. What began as Hermione reading aloud became the axis of destiny. The Deathly Hallows were not myth, but living proof that magic's deepest secrets often hide in plain sight. The children's tale had grown into the weapon that decided the fate of wizards and muggles alike. Number 15. The cowardly hero of Slytherin, Horace Slughorn. Under the dim light of the Great Hall during the Battle of Hogwarts, the readers saw a side of Horace Slughorn that no one truly expected. The man who once avoided danger, who prided himself on connections and prestige, stood not behind the shadows, but at the very front lines. For much of the series, Slughorn appeared as the epitome of self-preservation, a Slytherin who measured his actions by safety and personal benefit. Yet when the true moment of decision arrived, he chose to remain. His presence among the defenders became more than just another wand raised. It was a symbolic shift that whispered through the very bricks of the castle. Here was a Slytherin, once considered cowardly, now proving that courage was not reserved for Gryffindors alone. Slughorn's earlier appearances hardly suggested such an outcome. When Harry and Dumbledore first visited him in Half-Blood Prince, he had gone into hiding, disguising his home as wreckage to avoid attracting attention. He openly admitted to fearing Voldemort's return, confessing that he had no taste for confrontation. He had once boasted of teaching brilliant students like Tom Riddle, yet recoiled from the idea of standing against his former pupils' followers. His life was defined by the comfort of his slug club, where only talented or influential students gained his approval. For readers, Slughorn embodied a Slytherin who ran from danger rather than confronted it. This makes his decision during the Battle of Hogwarts so striking. When the castle's wards fell and Voldemort's forces attacked, Slughorn did not flee into the night. He returned to the Great Hall with reinforcements, rallying the older Slytherin students and villagers from Hogsmeade. Rowling describes his arrival with sudden force, and there, gleaming in his emerald green pyjamas, was Professor Slughorn, brandishing his wand. The image is almost comical at first, but beneath the humour lies a deeper truth. The teacher, who once cared for nothing beyond status, chose to risk everything. The importance of his choice cannot be overstated. Slytherin House had long carried the shadow of betrayal. Severus Snape was seen as a double agent. Draco Malfoy wavered between fear and loyalty to Voldemort. Countless Death Eaters had once worn the green and silver. To many, Slytherin meant cunning, ambition, and, more darkly, treachery. Yet Slughorn's participation shattered the easy stereotypes. By joining the battle, he reminded readers that a Slytherin's ambition could turn not only toward power, but also toward redemption and honor. The moment also highlights Rowling's larger theme. People are not defined solely by their past choices. Slughorn once gave Tom Riddle the crucial piece of knowledge about Horcruxes, a mistake that haunted him for decades. His fear of that error led him to retreat into the shadows, unwilling to face the consequences. But at Hogwarts, when the fate of the school was on the line, he made a different choice. By standing alongside Minerva McGonagall, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and even the ghosts of Gryffindor bravery, he carved out his own redemption. He could never undo what he had revealed to Riddle, but he could ensure that this time his knowledge and power defended life rather than fed destruction. Rowling presents his bravery in a subtle yet powerful way. Unlike Harry's bold defiance or Neville Longbottom's famous stand with the sword of Gryffindor, Slughorn's courage is quieter. He does not charge into the fray with youthful fury. Instead, he leads by returning when it would have been easier to vanish. The narrative never crowns him a hero, but his actions ripple across the story like quiet waves. When Voldemort finally fell, Slughorn's wand had been among the many raised against him. Readers may recall the line, "Even Slughorn, reluctant though he had been, fought valiantly that night." That admission is enough to transform our understanding of him. For the Slytherin image, this turn matters greatly. Students like Pansy Parkinson fled, suggesting betrayal remained common. Yet Rowling ensured that not all green and silver banners fell into shame. Slughorn's presence became a counterweight to the darkness. If one of the most cautious Slytherins could show loyalty in the direst moment, then the house itself was not inherently corrupt. Harry himself recognized this truth at the end, when he told his son Albus Severus that being sorted into Slytherin would not be a curse. Slughorn's role in the battle helped prepare the ground for that understanding. It is also worth reflecting on the contrast between Slughorn's earlier cowardice and his final bravery. He had spent years cultivating friendships with powerful witches and wizards, believing safety lay in prestige. He avoided Dumbledore's questions, fearing exposure of his Horcrux memory. He even hid from Death Eaters by transforming his house into ruins. Such behavior cemented his reputation as a man who put himself first. But when Hogwarts called, he did not rely on famous students or political allies. He simply stood with ordinary defenders. In that moment, power and connections meant nothing, only loyalty and courage carried weight. Number 16. Grindelwald's refusal to betray. Grindelwald's betrayal of Voldemort's expectations in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows stands as one of the most intriguing twists in the entire saga. Until that moment, readers had been conditioned to view Gellert Grindelwald as the archetypal dark wizard of the past, a figure whose very name struck terror, whose reign in Europe had left scars so deep that wizards still whispered about him decades later. He was presented as a precursor to Voldemort, an almost mythological villain, the shadow against which even Albus Dumbledore measured his life. Yet when Voldemort finally sought him out in the crumbling fortress of Nurmengard, expecting submission or at least fear, Grindelwald responded with something completely unexpected: defiance. This reversal reframed his character in a single stroke, reminding readers that even the darkest figures are capable of choices that resist the easy narrative of absolute evil. What made this twist so powerful was the weight of history behind it. Grindelwald had been Dumbledore's equal in brilliance and ambition, the boy with whom Albus once dreamed of reshaping the world for the greater good. His atrocities had not been acts of impulse, but rather the deliberate construction of a dark utopia, a vision rooted in domination masked as reform. By the time Dumbledore finally defeated him in 1945, Grindelwald had already secured his place as one of the greatest villains of wizarding history. Thus, when Voldemort came searching for the Elder Wand, readers expected Grindelwald, broken, imprisoned and aged, to yield to fear. Instead, Rowling inverted expectations. Grindelwald's response was not that of a coward. It was the refusal of a man who, even in defeat, could cling to a vestige of dignity. The moment is made unforgettable by the sparse but cutting description Rowling gives it. Voldemort approaches, expecting a terrified prisoner, eager to curry favour. Instead, Grindelwald denies him the information he craves. The text records, "He laughed," and though his laugh was less than a whisper, it was full of contempt. This laugh carries the entire force of the betrayal. Grindelwald, once the embodiment of cruelty, mocks the very wizard who has surpassed his legend. His words to Voldemort, "Kill me then, Voldemort, I welcome death, but my death will not bring you what you seek," strike like daggers, undermining Voldemort's confidence. The man who had terrorized Europe now becomes a mirror in which Voldemort sees his own weakness. The irony lies in the contrast between Grindelwald and Voldemort's paths. Both were obsessed with power, immortality, and the Elder Wand, yet Grindelwald, near the end of his life, demonstrates something Voldemort cannot comprehend, the acceptance of mortality. For Voldemort, the idea of embracing death is a kind of insanity, a foreign language he refuses to learn. Grindelwald's defiance is therefore not simply rebellion against Voldemort, but a subtle commentary on the themes of death and power that underpin the entire series, where Voldemort seeks to master death by controlling artifacts and splitting his soul. Grindelwald, in this moment, asserts mastery through choice. He chooses death over submission, thus achieving a kind of freedom Voldemort will never know. For the readers, this betrayal was shocking, because Grindelwald had never been framed as redeemable. Unlike Severus Snape, who lived in shades of grey, or Draco Malfoy, who struggled with cowardice and loyalty, Grindelwald was never given scenes of hesitation or regret. He was the legend of darkness, the tyrant of a past generation. That Rowling chose to grant him this final act of defiance complicates the moral tapestry of the story. It reminds us that evil is not monolithic. Even those steeped in cruelty can harbour a final spark of humanity, a refusal to serve the new tyrant, a silent recognition of boundaries they will not cross. What deepens the twist is the shadow of Dumbledore's influence. Grindelwald's refusal to betray the Elder Wand cannot be separated from his history with Albus. Though he and Dumbledore had long ago parted ways, the connection between them remained unbroken. In choosing not to reveal the wand's location, Grindelwald might have been protecting the memory of the man he once loved, or perhaps, in a way, he was honouring the duel that defined both their lives. By withholding the truth, Grindelwald ensures that Voldemort's path is obstructed, if only momentarily, and that Dumbledore's quiet victory, having laid the groundwork for Harry, remains untouched. In this sense, Grindelwald's betrayal of Voldemort is also a final acknowledgement of Dumbledore's triumph. Readers also cannot ignore the thematic echo of choice, which Dumbledore often stressed to Harry. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. Grindelwald embodies this truth in his final hour. His abilities had once been unrivaled, his crimes unmatched, yet it is his choice to resist Voldemort, to laugh in the face of death, that redefines his character in readers' minds. This choice does not erase his past, but casts it in a new light, suggesting that even monsters can reclaim fragments of dignity when confronted with something worse than themselves. In literary terms, the scene functions as a reversal, a tool that injects fresh energy into the climax of the narrative. Up to that point, Voldemort's dominance had seemed unstoppable. He was gathering the Horcruxes, hunting the Hallows, and crushing all opposition. By having Grindelwald resist him, Rowling introduces an unexpected barrier, a signal that Voldemort is not infallible and that not all enemies will cower before him. Grindelwald becomes the embodiment of resistance, however twisted his motives may have been in the past. His betrayal is a symbolic crack in Voldemort's illusion of absolute control. Number 17. Draco Malfoy's Wand and the Elder Wand. Of all the curious ironies in the Harry Potter saga, none shines more brilliantly than the unintentional role of Draco Malfoy in the downfall of Lord Voldemort. For years, Draco had been the shadow to Harry's light, a foil meant to highlight courage through cowardice, compassion through cruelty, and humility through arrogance. Yet, by the time the final confrontation in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows reaches its crescendo, it is Draco's wand, an object that seems trivial compared to the famed Elder Wand, that subtly shifts the entire balance of magical power. Without intending to, Draco becomes a silent architect of Voldemort's defeat, proving that destiny often emerges from the least expected sources. The moment that sealed Draco's unintended legacy occurred at Malfoy Manor, when Harry wrested Draco's Hawthorn wand from his grasp. The act was simple in execution, but monumental in consequence. The ownership of wands in Rowling's world is not a casual matter. The law insists that wands change allegiance when they are won through disarming, overpowering, or otherwise defeating their previous masters. By defeating Draco and taking his wand, Harry unknowingly inherited more than a tool for spellwork. He inherited the invisible thread of ownership that would later tie him to the Elder Wand itself. As Rowling described, Harry took Draco's wand and something shifted, intangible, yet powerful, deep inside. Deathly Hallows, Chapter 23. This intangible shift was the unseen lever that would move the fate of the wizarding world. To grasp the depth of this twist, one must recall the Elder Wand's reputation. Crafted by Death himself, as legend has it, the wand had passed through centuries of bloodshed, treachery, and ambition. It was supposed to be loyal only to the most powerful of masters. Voldemort, obsessed with conquering death, sought it as the ultimate weapon to guarantee his immortality. He stole it from Dumbledore's tomb, believing the theft alone was enough to claim ownership. Yet the wand resisted him, subtly sabotaging his power, because true mastery does not come through desecration, but through rightful succession. The rightful master, though Voldemort never realized it, was Harry, by virtue of disarming. Draco. Draco himself never craved the Elder Wand. He was a pawn in the larger game, forced into the service of Voldemort's will, his family broken under the strain of allegiance to the Dark Lord. When Dumbledore disarmed him atop the Astronomy Tower in Half-Blood Prince, Draco became, albeit reluctantly, the master of the Elder Wand. Voldemort never traced this invisible line of loyalty, and Draco himself never felt the weight of such ownership. Yet this hidden transfer ensured that the key to Voldemort's defeat lay not in the vaults of Gringotts, nor in the forest where Harry walked to his death, but in the unremarkable duel between Harry and Draco in the Malfoy family's drawing room. The irony becomes sharper when one recalls Lucius Malfoy's devotion to Voldemort. Lucius had been a loyal servant, willing to sacrifice his reputation, fortune, and safety for the cause. He saw in Voldemort the triumph of pure blood ideology, the fulfillment of all he had worked toward. For his son Draco, however, the burden of expectation crushed more than it inspired. Draco never wanted to be Voldemort's executioner. On the tower with Dumbledore, he hesitated, trembling with his wand raised, caught between his own conscience and his family's safety. That hesitation, that inability to fully embrace the role assigned to him, is what preserved his humanity and, in a cruel twist of fate, set in motion the chain that would lead to Voldemort's ruin. Harry's disarming of Draco at Malfoy Manor was not framed as epic. It was not heralded by prophecy, nor witnessed by a cheering crowd. It was, in fact, an act born of survival and desperation. Yet it illustrates a core truth of Rowling's narrative. The most decisive battles are often fought in silence, with no audience to applaud. When Harry later faced Voldemort in the Great Hall, the Elder Wand's loyalty lay hidden beneath the surface, invisible to everyone, including Voldemort himself. "I am the true master of the Elder Wand," Harry declared, a realization that stunned not only Voldemort, but the readers who had been led through the intricate maze of wand lore throughout the series. The true master was not the feared Dark Lord, not the headmaster entombed with glory, but the boy who had once simply snatched Draco's wand in a desperate moment. The brilliance of this twist lies in its subtlety. Readers had been conditioned to expect grand gestures, climactic battles, and heroic sacrifices. Indeed, the series is full of them. But the fate of the Elder Wand hinged not on a blood-soaked duel, but on a relatively quiet confrontation in which Draco was merely an unwilling participant. This was not only a narrative sleight of hand, but a philosophical statement. Rowling suggests that even the seemingly small interactions, an act of hesitation, an unwilling duel, a wand slipping from one hand to another, can reshape the destiny of the world. Draco's role as the accidental catalyst is even more striking because it redefines his relationship with Harry. For years, Draco had existed as an antagonist, sneering in corridors, taunting on the Quidditch pitch, mocking at every turn. He represented everything Harry despised: privilege without empathy, cruelty disguised as tradition, ambition untempered by morality. And yet in the end, Draco's wand becomes the bridge to Harry's triumph. It is as though Rowling reminds us that even those who walk the path of pettiness and arrogance can, however unwillingly, serve the cause of good. Draco's lack of agency in the matter underscores the theme that destiny often uses the reluctant, the flawed, and the unwilling to accomplish what the proud and powerful cannot. Number 18. Snape and the Killing Curse. Under the shadowed ramparts of Hogwarts, where the cold night air pressed heavily against the stone walls, a single incantation shattered everything the readers thought they knew about loyalty, betrayal, and sacrifice. Severus Snape's utterance of Avada Kedavra in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince seemed to crystallize him as the villain many always suspected him to be. Albus Dumbledore, the most revered figure in Harry's world, fell lifelessly from the astronomy tower, and with him crumbled the fragile security that held Hogwarts together. The sheer finality of that moment made readers reel with outrage. Snape, who had been trusted, who had seemed ambiguous but controllable, had crossed the line with one fatal curse, yet ruling in. Her layered design planted a narrative trap. What looked like betrayal was not the end of the story, but the setup for one of the most powerful reversals in the entire saga. In the immediate aftermath of that chapter, titled The Lightning-Struck Tower, the audience shared Harry's burning fury. The image of Draco Malfoy lowering his wand, trembling and uncertain, contrasted sharply with Snape's brutal efficiency. Where Draco hesitated, torn between fear and morality, Snape acted without pause, without visible regret. Readers, like Harry, saw only the surface, a man who had chosen Voldemort over Dumbledore. Rowling intensified the betrayal by forcing us into Harry's perspective, letting his helplessness harden into rage. "Coward!" Harry screamed in the book, echoing the outcry of millions of readers who felt they had finally unmasked Snape's true nature. But this moment was only half the truth, deliberately designed to wound so that the healing revelation later would cut even deeper. What transformed this moment from a mere plot twist into a masterstroke of storytelling was the later revelation in Deathly Hallows. When Harry entered the Pensieve and submerged himself in Snape's memories, the perspective shattered. Suddenly, the man who had seemed irredeemable revealed a hidden depth of loyalty. "Severus, please." Dumbledore's words on the tower, once interpreted as pleading for his life, were shown to be something entirely different. They were a signal, a reminder of the pact they had made long before, Dumbledore, weakened by the cursed ring he had destroyed, knew his death was inevitable. He needed Snape to end his life at the right time, sparing Draco from committing murder and cementing Voldemort's trust in Snape. What had looked like cold-hearted murder was in fact an act of mercy, devotion, and unimaginable burden. The artistry lies in how Rowling manipulated perspective to deceive without lying. At no point did she contradict the rules of her world or retroactively explain away inconsistencies. Every clue was present, hidden in plain sight. Readers recalled Dumbledore's insistence that he trusted Snape completely, a trust that had seemed almost reckless. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore defended Snape against the suspicions of the Order of the Phoenix with such calm certainty that it bordered on naivety. "I am sure I trust Severus." "Snape completely," he declared. At the time, this was taken as Dumbledore's trademark optimism, his almost irritating belief in redemption. Only later did it become clear that Dumbledore's confidence rested not on blind faith, but on shared secrets, plans whispered in the dark, and a choice Snape had already made. Snape's own life was transformed in that instant on the Tower. To the Death Eaters who witnessed it, he became Voldemort's most valued ally. To the Order, he became the ultimate traitor. To Harry, he became the murderer of a mentor and father figure. And yet, in reality, Snape had condemned himself to a role where no one could truly understand him. His act required a complete erasure of sympathy from both sides. Few characters in literature bear such isolation, reviled by those he saved, celebrated by those he despised. This paradox was not accidental, but the heart of Rowling's moral design. Snape became the double agent whose greatest sacrifice was not death itself, but a lifetime of being misunderstood. The Avada Kedavra curse itself deepened the drama. This was no subtle poisoning, no secret hex. It was the most direct and irrevocable of curses, the one spell that symbolized Voldemort's reign of terror. Rowling could have chosen a different method for Dumbledore's death, but she deliberately used the most loaded spell in the wizarding world. For readers, the green flash carried decades of trauma within the narrative. It was the same curse that killed Harry's parents, the same curse Harry miraculously survived. By putting that word in Snape's mouth, Rowling ensured the betrayal landed with the maximum weight. Yet by later reframing it, she forced readers to reconsider even the darkest magic. Sometimes it could be wielded not out of hatred, but out of necessity. The echoes of this twist ripple backward through the entire series. In Philosopher's Stone, Harry's mistrust of Snape seemed childish but intuitive. In Chamber of Secrets, Snape's cold disdain felt like proof of villainy. Each suspicion gained weight until Half-Blood Prince made them feel justified, and then Deathly Hallows dismantled them, showing that what Harry had perceived as malice was often the armor of a man carrying unbearable secrets. For example, Snape's harsh treatment of Harry, once viewed as cruelty, can be reinterpreted as a desperate attempt to maintain distance. 2. Keep Voldemort from suspecting the depth of his protective feelings. Even his contemptuous words, "You have your mother's eyes," became loaded with layers of longing and regret once the truth about Lily surfaced. The turning point inside the Pensieve, when Dumbledore asked Snape if he had grown to care for the boy, crystallized the tragedy of Snape's existence. "For him?" shouted Snape, "expecto patronum!" And from his wand burst the silver doe identical to Lily's Patronus. That one image reframed the Astronomy Tower forever. Snape had not murdered Dumbledore out of cruelty or ambition. He had done it out of love for Lily, love twisted into duty. The curse that once looked like betrayal became a monument to unending grief, a spell cast by a man still bound to a promise made decades earlier. For readers, the revelation demanded a re-evaluation of moral categories. The binary of hero and villain blurred into something more complex. Snape was not absolved of cruelty, nor was his bitterness erased. But his act on the tower, once seen as proof of his darkness, became evidence of his ultimate sacrifice. Dumbledore, too, was reframed. His manipulation of Snape, asking him to shoulder such a burden, revealed a cold calculation beneath his warmth. This duality, the noble plan built on personal suffering, forced readers to confront the unsettling truth that even the wisest leaders may demand unbearable sacrifices of others. From a storytelling perspective, the twist was masterful because it retroactively enriched every previous book. Readers revisited scenes with new eyes, catching nuances they had missed. The confrontation between Snape and Harry in Order of the Phoenix, filled with bitterness, became tinged with irony. Snape's insistence on teaching Harry occlumency, once seen as sabotage, could now be viewed as a clumsy attempt to shield him from Voldemort's penetration. Every scowl, every insult carried the weight of suppressed truth. The astronomy tower was no longer an end but a fulcrum, a moment upon which the entire emotional arc of the series balanced. This twist also reshaped Harry's journey. Until the final battle, Harry defined himself in opposition to Snape. Hatred for the traitor burned alongside his grief for Dumbledore. But in the Forbidden Forest, walking toward his own death, Harry carried Snape's memories with him. They gave him not only knowledge but a new understanding of sacrifice. Snape's burden mirrored Harry's own. Both would die misunderstood. Both would walk into the dark because love demanded it. The boy who once called Snape a coward finally saw him as the bravest man he had ever known. The Avada Kedavra of the tower became the mirror of Voldemort's Avada Kedavra in the forest, one cast from love, the other from hatred. The choice to have Snape kill Dumbledore also elevated Voldemort's downfall. By ensuring Voldemort trusted Snape completely, the Dark Lord sealed his own fate. He never realized that his most loyal servant's allegiance belonged to Lily's memory, not to him. In his arrogance, Voldemort believed power could command loyalty, but Rowling used Snape to prove that love outlasts fear. The Astronomy Tower, therefore, was not just a climax for one book, but a cornerstone for the entire saga's themes: love's triumph over death, sacrifice's quiet nobility, and the futility of tyranny built on mistrust. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is that Snape himself never enjoyed redemption in life. When he whispered, "Look at me," with his final breath, Harry gave him the one gift he craved, Lily's eyes gazing at him in his last moment. But the wider world continued to view him as Dumbledore's murderer until Harry later revealed the truth. This delay in recognition made his sacrifice even more poignant. Unlike heroes celebrated in life, Snape bore the cost of being hated until the very end. His Avada Kedavra was not only a weapon but a brand that scarred his name forever until time and memory restored his honor. The success of this plot twist rests on its emotional impact. It was not simply clever deception, but a revelation that forced readers to feel grief, rage, and finally compassion. By making us hate Snape before showing his true motives, Rowling mirrored Harry's journey, pulling us through the same stages of misunderstanding. The Astronomy Tower scene is remembered not just because of its shock, but because of its transformation. The curse that felled Dumbledore ultimately raised Snape to tragic greatness, a paradox that embodies the complexity of Rowling's world. In the end, the moment Snape raised his wand and spoke those two terrible words became one of the most significant events in modern fantasy literature. It proved that betrayal could conceal devotion, that the darkest spell could carry love, and that the most despised figure could embody the deepest form of bravery. The Avada Kedavra on the tower was not the end of Dumbledore's story, but the unveiling of Snape's. And in that unveiling, Rowling secured one of the greatest narrative reversals in contemporary storytelling. Number 19, Sybil Trelawney and the Prophecy. Of all the eccentric figures who walked the halls of Hogwarts, few were as underestimated as Professor Sybil Trelawney. Wrapped in shawls, clinking with beads, and forever lost in a haze of incense, she appeared to students as little more than comic relief. Hermione Granger dismissed her as a fraud, Harry Potter himself found her classes frustrating, and even the staff of Hogwarts barely took her seriously. Yet hidden beneath this appearance of folly lay the seed of destiny. Her prophecy, spoken in a trembling voice in a small room above the Hog's head, became the spark that ignited the entire conflict with Lord Voldemort. It was the twist that gave depth to her character and altered the fate of the wizarding world forever. The prophecy was simple in its form, yet staggering in its consequences. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. This sentence, whispered in a trance, changed the course of history. At the time of its utterance, Trelawney did not fully grasp its meaning, but Albus Dumbledore, who heard the words firsthand, knew that this was no ordinary prediction. Voldemort's own fear of the prophecy set the tragedy in motion as he sought to destroy the child it described. It was irony at its cruelest. The Dark Lord, in trying to prevent his downfall, ensured it. The irony grew sharper when one remembers how easily Trelawney's work was dismissed. Her predictions of death were frequent, her grand pronouncements vague. She once told Lavender Brown that her rabbit would die, and by coincidence the poor creature did. She proclaimed Harry would face great danger each year, which to the boy felt like a tired joke rather than true foresight. These surface predictions seemed trivial, yet they built a clever disguise. Behind the veil of eccentricity was a woman whose single true prophecy became the backbone of the narrative. For readers, the revelation that Trelawney had been the source of the prophecy was a masterful stroke. Until that moment, she had been a figure of ridicule, mocked by students and ignored by most of the staff. To suddenly discover that her voice had unknowingly dictated the story's foundation gave the tale both weight and surprise. This was not a new villain appearing without warning, nor a new spell invented for convenience. It was a carefully hidden truth, revealed at the precise moment to reframe our understanding. The effect of her prophecy rippled outward like cracks in glass. 2 children could have fit the description, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, both born at the end of July to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort. Voldemort's choice to mark Harry as the one ensured that Harry carried the scar, the connection, and the destiny of their shared struggle. But it is crucial to note that the prophecy itself did not choose Harry. Voldemort did. This twist places the weight of destiny not only on foresight, but on choice, both by the villain and later by the hero. This detail elevates Trelawney's prophecy from a simple prediction to a narrative keystone. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, the story would have unfolded differently, yet perhaps to the same tragic ends. What mattered was not the prophecy's inevitability, but how people acted upon it. In this way, Rowling revealed her deep understanding of storytelling, fate and free will intertwined, forcing both characters and readers to wrestle with what it means to be chosen. Trelawney herself remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her words. She continued to teach in her tower classroom, swaying under the weight of crystal balls and perfumed smoke, predicting doom at every turn. The beauty of the twist lies in this contrast. She, who changed everything, was treated as if she had changed nothing. Even when Dolores Umbridge tried to expel her, Dumbledore defended her with a fierceness that baffled others. His protection was not only out of kindness, but also because he knew the weight of the secret she carried, even if she did not. The story gains even greater poignancy when one recalls that Trelawney gave another true prophecy later. In the same fragile, trembling state, she spoke of Voldemort's servant returning to him, foretelling Wormtail's escape and the Dark Lord's rebirth. Once again, she had no recollection afterward. These rare glimpses of true sight framed her not as a fraud, but as a vessel through which fate occasionally spoke. She was both ridiculous and powerful, a contradiction that deepened the texture of the story. Harry's discovery of the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries solidified its role as a turning point. He learned not only of the words but of the burden they carried. The prophecy revealed that neither can live while the other survives. For Harry this was devastating, for it meant his life was tied to Voldemort's death. For readers, it reframed the entire saga as more than a battle of good and evil. It was a predestined clash sparked by words spoken years before by a woman most had dismissed as irrelevant. Rowling's decision to use Trelawney in this way was brilliant because it exploited reader expectation. Characters like Dumbledore, Snape, and even Sirius were surrounded by gravitas. They were expected to shape the story's direction. But Trelawney, with her shawls and sherry, seemed incapable of such weight. The twist that she had unknowingly determined Harry's destiny elevated her from a caricature to a vital link in the chain of fate. Even Severus Snape's role as the eavesdropper ties back to Trelawney's prophecy. His partial hearing of her words carried back to Voldemort triggered the attack on the Potters. This connection wove Trelawney into the very heart of Snape's tragic story. Without her prophecy, Snape would not have begged for Lily's life, nor would he have become the double agent whose sacrifices defined so much of the saga. Thus her influence stretched beyond Harry and Voldemort to touch every corner of the narrative. Consider the structure of the series without her. Remove the prophecy and Voldemort might have ignored Harry entirely, focusing instead on consolidating his power. The Potters would not have been targeted, Lily would not have died to save her son, and Harry would not have been marked by love's protection. In short, the entire saga collapses without the words of this one overlooked professor. This is what makes her involvement such a successful plot twist. It is not merely decorative, but foundational. There is also a poetic justice in how Trelawney's colleagues dismissed her. Minerva McGonagall once remarked that true seers are extremely rare and implied that Trelawney was not one. Yet McGonagall herself, pragmatic and stern, could not see the future, while the woman she mocked gave the prophecy that shaped the entire age. This inversion of expectations underscores Rowling's larger message. Wisdom and importance may hide in unlikely places, and one should never judge solely by appearances. The prophecy also reinforced one of the series' central themes, that knowledge is both power and burden. Dumbledore chose not to reveal the full prophecy to Harry until the boy was ready, fearing the weight it would place on him. This withholding shaped Harry's growth, as he fought not only enemies, but also the suffocating feeling of destiny pressing upon him. The audience, too, felt the gravity of words spoken so casually by a woman forgotten by most of Hogwarts. When viewed through this lens, Sybil Trelawney becomes more than an eccentric minor character. She becomes the hidden architect of fate, her voice echoing in every battle, every sacrifice, every choice that followed. The twist works so well because it is both surprising and inevitable. Surprising because it emerges from such an unlikely source. Inevitable because once revealed it makes perfect sense. The prophecy was the hinge upon which the entire saga turned, and Sybil Trelawney, in her shawls and sherry-soaked haze, was the one who set it all in motion. Number 20, Draco Malfoy and his mission. Draco Malfoy had always been an antagonist in the story, a sneering boy who mocked Harry Potter from their very first meeting in Madame Malkin's robe shop. He seemed destined to fill the role of schoolyard bully, a shadow at the edge of Harry's triumphs, always ready with an insult about blood purity or a bitter reminder of his family's wealth. For years, readers had been conditioned to see him as nothing more than that, arrogant, cruel, and ultimately unimportant in the larger war that raged beyond the walls of Hogwarts. But in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, J.K. Rowling shattered that assumption. Draco, who once laughed loudly in the Great Hall and strutted down corridors with Crabbe and Goyle at his sides, was suddenly subdued, withdrawn, and haunted. The shift was subtle at first, but unmistakable, and it prepared the stage for one of the most effective plot twists in the entire saga. The revelation that Lord Voldemort had personally given Draco Malfoy the mission to assassinate Albus Dumbledore changed the tone of the story and reframed Draco entirely. It was no longer a game of childish rivalries between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Instead, Draco was forced into the dangerous world of death and betrayal that Harry himself had been living in for years. The task was not one that a 16-year-old boy could reasonably fulfill, but Voldemort never intended for Draco to succeed. Rather, it was punishment for Lucius Malfoy's failure at the Department of Mysteries, a way to humiliate the Malfoy family and force them into complete submission. Rowling captures this unbearable weight in a single description. Draco looked as pale and thin as the moon, with dark shadows under his eyes, as though he had not slept properly for weeks. His swagger was gone, and in its place was a child thrust into a role far larger than himself. The brilliance of this plot twist lies in how Rowling planted the clues throughout the book. Draco's secretive trips, his obsession with the Room of Requirement, and his frequent appearances in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom all hinted at something darker than the usual school mischief. For readers, the mystery deepened every time Harry's suspicions were dismissed by others. Ron and Hermione believed Harry was imagining Draco's involvement with the Death Eaters, while Dumbledore himself seemed content to let events unfold. This tension heightened the shock when the truth came to light. Suddenly the pieces aligned. Draco was repairing the vanishing cabinet in order to bring Death Eaters into Hogwarts, an act that would culminate in the infamous night on the Astronomy Tower. The scene on the Astronomy Tower remains one of the most powerful in the series because it revealed Draco's humanity in the starkest way. When he finally confronted Dumbledore, wand raised, his hands were trembling. He was cornered, terrified, and yet bound by the impossible command Voldemort had given him. "But I got to do it! He'll kill me! He'll kill my whole family!" Draco shouts, his voice breaking under the pressure. In that moment, the reader is forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about him. He was not a villain in control of his destiny. He was a frightened boy being crushed by forces he could not resist. The bully from the early books had vanished, replaced by a tragic figure caught in the machinery of war. Harry's perspective throughout the book magnified the effectiveness of the twist. He had long been obsessed with proving Draco's guilt, convinced that Malfoy was up to something sinister. When he spied on Draco in Borgin and Berks or tried to follow him around the castle, his accusations seemed paranoid to his friends. Yet Harry was right, though not in the way he imagined. Draco was indeed engaged in a dangerous plot, but rather than relishing the role of Voldemort's servant, he was unraveling under it. The contrast between Harry's determination expose Draco and Draco's inner torment made the eventual revelation both shocking and tragic. It was not the vindication Harry sought, but rather a painful reminder that the war was claiming children on both sides. The bathroom scene with Moaning Myrtle provided perhaps the clearest glimpse into Draco's suffering. After months of secrecy, he collapsed in tears, confessing that he was not doing it and that he can't do it. He was alone, unburdening himself only to the ghost of a girl who had died decades before. It is a rare and vulnerable moment, one that strips away the layers of arrogance and cruelty that had defined him. When Harry stumbled upon him and cast the Sectum Sempra curse, nearly killing him, it was a brutal reminder of how quickly the war consumed even the youngest participants. Draco's sobbing figure, wounded and broken, lingers as one of the series' most haunting images. The use of the vanishing cabinet as Draco's secret weapon was also a masterstroke of narrative construction. Introduced earlier in Chamber of Secrets as a throwaway object, it returned with devastating importance. Draco's long hours of work to repair it became symbolic of his attempt to fix an unfixable situation. He was desperately piecing together a path to survival, convinced that if he completed Voldemort's task, his family might be spared. Yet the cabinet, once repaired, unleashed destruction far greater than Draco anticipated. Through it came the Death Eaters who set the stage for Dumbledore's death. The twist was not only shocking, it was also deeply ironic. Draco's success in repairing the cabinet was, in reality, his ultimate failure, as it placed him even deeper in Voldemort's grasp. The character of Narcissa Malfoy, Draco's mother, added another layer of tragedy to the plot twist. Desperate to protect her son, she sought out Severus Snape and begged him to make the unbreakable vow. Her love for Draco was palpable, and her willingness to involve Snape in this dangerous oath demonstrated how far she would go to shield him from Voldemort's wrath. "If Draco fails," she whispered, "you will carry out the deed that the Dark Lord has ordered Draco to perform." In that single scene, the Malfoys were transformed from haughty antagonists into a family drowning under the weight of impossible expectations. It became clear that Draco was not merely a pawn, but a son trapped in a desperate struggle for survival. Dumbledore's handling of the situation also revealed his wisdom and compassion. Confronted by Draco on the tower, he spoke gently, recognizing the boy's fear. Draco, you are not a killer," Dumbledore told him. He offered Draco a way out, an opportunity to choose differently, to step back from the brink. In that moment, the tension was unbearable. Readers were caught between hope and dread, watching as Draco's shaking hand hovered over his wand. The scene underscored Dumbledore's gift for seeing the humanity in others, even in a boy who had been groomed by his family and Voldemort alike. Draco's hesitation, his refusal to strike the killing blow, proved that Dumbledore was right. There was still a part of him that longed to resist. The arrival of the Death Eaters and Snape's eventual killing of Dumbledore resolved the moment in a way that protected Draco but forever altered his life. Draco never spoke the words or cast the curse. He was spared the guilt of murder, though not the responsibility of having opened the door to those who did. His mission had been both a failure and a success. He had not killed Dumbledore, but he had allowed Voldemort's forces to penetrate Hogwarts and claim victory. The twist lay not only in the assignment Voldemort had given him, but in the way Draco responded. He was no longer simply Harry's rival. He was a boy forced into a crucible that exposed his fear, his weakness, and ultimately his humanity. For readers, the plot twist forced a reconsideration of good and evil within the series. Up to this point, it was easy to categorize characters. Harry and his friends stood for the light, while Voldemort and his Death Eaters embodied darkness. Draco's arc disrupted that binary. He was a child raised in a household steeped in ideology, manipulated by a powerful dark wizard, and thrust into a position where any choice led to ruin. His tears in the bathroom, his trembling hand on the tower, and his inability to curse Dumbledore complicated the notion of villainy. Readers were reminded that the war destroyed innocence on both sides, and that sometimes survival required choices that defied easy moral judgment. This narrative turn also deepened the overall themes of fate and free will in the series. Draco did not choose to be Voldemort's pawn. The decision was forced upon him because of his father's failure. Yet he still had choices: to attempt the mission, to confide in Myrtle, to lower his wand when Dumbledore offered him mercy. His inability to kill Dumbledore demonstrated that even under immense pressure, he retained some measure of agency. The plot twist thus functioned not just as shock value, but as a meditation on the ways in which individuals resist or submit to overwhelming evil. Draco's choices may have been small, but they were deeply significant in defining who he was. The storyline also mirrored Harry's own burden in striking ways. Both boys at 16 were caught in struggles far larger than themselves, carrying responsibilities no child should bear. Harry was being groomed to face Voldemort, to accept a destiny that tied his life to prophecy. Draco, meanwhile, was carrying out a mission that would decide his family's fate. The juxtaposition of these two figures, one representing the side of resistance, the other the side of oppression, revealed the cruelty of war. The twist did not merely add drama, it reminded readers that children were casualties, drafted into roles that broke them before they had the chance to grow. Ultimately, the twist of Draco's mission remains one of Rowling's finest narrative achievements because it humanized a character long dismissed as one-dimensional. By placing Draco in a situation where failure meant death and success meant damnation, she forced readers to confront the tragedy of his life. He was not absolved of his cruelty, nor was he redeemed in that moment, but he became complex, real, and pitiable. The reader could despise his arrogance and prejudice while still recognizing his fear and suffering. It was storytelling at its sharpest edge, transforming a schoolyard bully into a tragic figure with a single assignment that he was never meant to complete. Number 21. The death of Fred Weasley. Fred Weasley's death was not simply a tragic footnote in the final battle of Hogwarts, it was one of the most shocking narrative decisions J.K. Rowling ever made in the Harry Potter series. For 7 books, the Weasley family represented stability, warmth, and resilience. Their home at the Burrow was a sanctuary for Harry. Their laughter echoed through the darkest moments, and their loyalty was unwavering. To strike at them was to strike at the emotional heart of the story. When Fred was killed during the Battle of Hogwarts, the sense of security readers had clung to was shattered. Suddenly, the war against Voldemort was not an abstract struggle of good and evil. It became a brutal reminder that even the most beloved and joyful characters could be lost without warning. From their very first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Fred and George Weasley were symbols of lightness in a world that often pressed down on Harry with unbearable weight. They smuggled fireworks into classrooms, turned detentions into pranks, and mocked Percy's self-importance. Yet beneath the jokes was an unspoken truth. They were part of the backbone of Harry's found family. They were proof that laughter could exist alongside hardship. Losing Fred meant losing half of that balance. His death was not only the silencing of a joke mid-sentence, but the cruel severing of a bond that was defined by its unity. Readers were prepared for losses in the climactic war. Albus Dumbledore had already fallen at the end of the 6th book, and Remus Lupin's and Nymphadora Tonks's deaths were cruel but foreseeable. Even the risk to Harry himself was anticipated, but Fred's death blindsided many because of the way Rowling wrote it. She offered almost no foreshadowing. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Fred is still smiling, still joking, still alive in every sense of the word when he dies, suddenly in an explosion caused during the battle. And Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face. That description tore through readers because it froze him in the very essence of who he was, a boy of laughter taken in the middle of joy. Rowling's decision also carried an important narrative weight. It denied readers the comfort of predictability. If a member of the Weasley family could die, then no one was safe. The final book demanded a level of emotional realism because war itself spares no favourites. Through Fred's death, Rowling forced readers to confront the consequences of violence and the cost of resistance. It was a reminder that victory comes at a terrible price, and that price is sometimes exacted from the people least deserving of it. For George Weasley, the loss was more than a brother's death. It was the tearing away of half his identity. The twins had always been spoken of as one unit, Fred and George, a single phrase. They finished each other's sentences, read each other's minds, and thrived on their inseparability. Fred's absence left George incomplete in a way that was more than symbolic. The text leaves George alive, but profoundly wounded, unable to fill the silence Fred left behind. Readers cannot help but imagine George walking back into the empty shop of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, hearing only his own voice echo where once there had been two. The tragedy reverberates beyond the page because it touches on the deepest fear of losing not just a loved one, but a soulmate in life's journey. The placement of Fred's death within the chaotic storm of the battle also amplified its effect. It occurred not during a moment of pause or quiet reflection, but in the middle of a relentless fight for survival. Death came without warning, underscoring the reality that war is unfair and often senseless. There was no heroic duel, no grand sacrifice, only sudden violence that left the survivors stunned. In this way, Rowling depicted war as it truly is, brutal, abrupt, and indiscriminate. Fred's death did not glorify him as a martyr. Instead, it exposed the cruelty of a world where even laughter can be snuffed out in an instant. The Weasley family's reaction magnified the pain. Arthur and Molly Weasley, who had already lived in constant fear for their children, were forced to bury one of their own. Ginny, who had faced death herself in the Chamber of Secrets, lost a brother she had idolized. Ron, Harry's loyal companion, was forced to fight on through the grief of losing one of the siblings who had defined his childhood. The book gives only a glimpse of this grief, but the imagination of the reader fills in the rest. One cannot help but picture Molly Weasley, in the aftermath, clutching Fred's body, her earlier words echoing back, "You'll never know what it's like to lose a child." In that moment, the protective mother who had fought like a lioness against Bellatrix Lestrange embodied the pain of countless parents torn apart by war. What makes Fred's death particularly powerful is that it was not merely about him, it reflected a broader truth about the costs of resistance. Throughout the series, the Weasleys stood as examples of moral courage. They were poor in material wealth, but rich in integrity. Arthur risked his career for his values, Molly took Harry in as her own, and the children consistently fought for what was right. By taking one of them away, Rowling showed that bravery does not grant immunity from suffering. The Weasleys' willingness to stand against Voldemort demanded sacrifice, and Fred's death was the cruel price of their honor. There is also a striking thematic contrast between Fred's fate and the continued survival of others. Characters like Draco Malfoy, who hesitated and wavered in their allegiances, lived through the war. Peter Pettigrew, the coward who betrayed Harry's parents, lived for far longer than many braver souls. The injustice of Fred's loss is a deliberate reminder that war does not operate according to narrative fairness. Good people die while cowards survive, and the universe offers no explanation. This discomfort forces readers to grapple with the unfairness of real life mirrored in fiction. The decision to end Fred's story during his moment of laughter resonates on a symbolic level. Laughter had always been his weapon against darkness. From mocking Umbridge in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix to setting off fireworks that filled the sky with blazing dragons and rockets, Fred's joy was resistance in its purest form. To have that joy silenced mid-smile was perhaps Rowling's cruelest but most poignant act of storytelling. It immortalized Fred not as a soldier or a victim, but as a reminder that even joy itself can be a casualty of war. Many readers recall the moment of his death as one of the passages where they physically had to stop reading, stunned by the suddenness. The words blurred on the page, not because the writing was unclear, but because grief flooded in. Rowling did not dwell on his funeral or his absence in detail, leaving readers to process it in the same abrupt manner as the characters themselves. The loss lingered precisely because it was not fully explained, not neatly tied up with a lesson. It left a scar, much like war leaves scars that never heal. The aftermath for George has sparked endless reflection. Fan discussions often dwell on how he might have continued the shop, or whether he ever found joy again. Rowling herself admitted in interviews that George never fully recovered. This lingering wound gave the series a haunting realism. Happy endings in fiction often gloss over trauma, but in this case, the happy ending for the wizarding world was forever shadowed by the grief of those left behind. Fred's absence made victory bittersweet, reminding readers that triumph does not erase loss. Some critics have argued that Fred's death was unnecessary, that Rowling could have spared the Weasleys to allow readers the comfort of seeing them whole. Yet the very lack of necessity is what gives it power. Real wars claim lives arbitrarily, without purpose or meaning. By refusing to grant narrative mercy, Rowling created one of the most enduring emotional memories of the series. Fred's death did not drive the plot forward in the same way as Dumbledore's or Snape's, but it shaped the emotional truth of the finale more profoundly than any other loss. Fred's death also marked a shift in how readers perceived the Weasley family. They were no longer untouchable symbols of joy and togetherness. They became real, vulnerable, broken by loss yet still standing. This transformation elevated them from beloved side characters to enduring icons of resilience. The reader's heart ached for George, but it also swelled with admiration for the family's ability to keep going. The Weasleys' grief became part of their legacy, reminding readers that courage is not just fighting battles, but surviving the unbearable. Ultimately, Fred Weasley's death endures in memory because it was not only unexpected but also deeply unfair. It stripped away illusions of safety and reminded readers that in the wizarding world, as in our own, war demands sacrifices that leave permanent holes in families and friendships. Fred died with laughter on his lips, and that final image haunts the story as a cruel irony and a tragic truth. For Harry and his friends, the victory over Voldemort came at the cost of losing one of the brightest sparks of joy. For readers, it was a lesson that even in the most magical tales, loss is real, grief is permanent, and laughter, though silenced, echoes on. Number 22, Grindelwald and Dumbledore, the duel of the century. Of all the legends whispered in the wizarding world, few carried such weight and mystery as the duel between Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald. For years in the Harry Potter series, the story lingered like a shadowy rumour, something students might have heard about in passing, but never grasped in its full detail. When Harry himself first learned of it, it felt like a distant tale about adults long gone. Yet the eventual unveiling of the truth transformed this legend into one of the most powerful narrative turns in the saga. The revelation that two of the greatest wizards of their time, once bound by friendship, clashed in a duel that determined the direction of magical history, was not just shocking for Harry, it was a reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the heavy cost of ambition. The books describe Grindelwald as a dark revolutionary, a wizard who sought to conquer not out of mere cruelty, but under the guise of the greater good. His ideology was chilling in its simplicity. Wizards, as the superior beings, had the right to rule over muggles. What makes this chilling creed more disturbing is the realization that Dumbledore himself in his youth had been tempted by it. Rowling lets us see fragments of this truth through Rita Skeeter's The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, where Harry reads the words that make his stomach twist for the greater good. Those words, once part of Grindelwald's rhetoric, had been echoed by Dumbledore when he was young, swept away by the intoxicating vision of a new order. Suddenly the legend of the duel became deeply personal for Harry, for this was not simply about good versus evil, but about betrayal, guilt, and the shattering of once-cherished bonds. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald was not merely the clash of two powerful wizards, it was the confrontation of ideals that had once been shared. Their friendship in youth was full of promise, a meeting of two extraordinary minds dreaming of reshaping the world. For Harry, learning that Dumbledore had once admired Grindelwald was destabilizing. This was not the flawless mentor he had imagined. The duel then became not just a story of triumph, but one of moral reckoning. How could Dumbledore, the beacon of Hogwarts, have once stood so close to darkness? It is here that the narrative delivers its sharpest twist. The hero of the wizarding world was not always a hero. He was human, fallible, and scarred by choices that haunted him forever. The confrontation itself, often referred to in the wizarding community as the duel of the century, was described by witnesses as an epic battle of light and shadow. Although Rowling does not narrate the duel blow by blow, its mythic stature is clear. It was a fight that lasted hours, that destroyed streets and buildings, and that ended with Grindelwald's defeat. For Harry, who only hears of it in fragments, the importance lies not in the spectacle but in what it meant. This was not simply about defeating a dark wizard, it was about Dumbledore facing the spectre of his own past. He alone could bring down Grindelwald because he alone knew him, both as a rival and as someone he had once loved. He feared that truth, Rowling writes, more than any duel. And yet he faced it, turning the legend into something greater than a story of magic. It was a story of redemption. This revelation also shaped Harry's understanding of leadership. He had always seen Dumbledore as wise, untouchable, the embodiment of calm certainty. Yet the truth of the duel revealed a man racked by guilt, someone who spent decades avoiding the fight until destiny cornered him. This was the Dumbledore Harry never fully knew until late in the series, a man who admitted that his greatest regret was delaying the inevitable because he was terrified of what he might discover about himself. In Rita Skeeter's cruel words, he was as reluctant to meet Grindelwald in battle as a boy is to meet his first love in the dark. What Harry realized was that the most legendary victory of his headmaster was also his most painful wound. The duel's emotional weight comes not only from the fact that Grindelwald and Dumbledore were once allies, but that they were once inseparable. Bathilda Bagshot's accounts, twisted by Skeeter, reveal how the two young men would spend long afternoons discussing philosophy, plotting their new world, and sharing dreams. They were brilliant together, Bathilda recalled. For Harry, who himself had known both friendship and betrayal, the tragedy of their broken bond resonated deeply. To fight a stranger is one thing. To fight someone who once shared your heartbeat, your thoughts, and your ambition, that is another. This is why the duel reverberated as more than history. It was the climax of a love story turned to ashes. Harry's shock at this truth also served as a mirror for the reader. Until that point, Dumbledore seemed like a guiding star, someone whose past was simply a tapestry of wisdom and victories. Yet Rowling deliberately unravelled this illusion, revealing the fragility even in the greatest of figures. The duel of Dumbledore and Grindelwald became the turning point where legend became flesh. "You know the secret of my heart, what I never told anyone else," Dumbledore admitted to Harry through the pensive. In these words, the duel became more than a fight. It became a confession, a confrontation with guilt that defined the rest of Dumbledore's life. The power of this plot twist lies in how it redefines what strength means in the wizarding world. Grindelwald's defeat was not merely about magical superiority, it was about the courage to face one's past, the resilience to confront guilt, and the willingness to act despite fear. This is what Harry had to learn too. Just as Dumbledore stood against Grindelwald, Harry would later have to stand against Voldemort, not only as an enemy, but as someone who shared a mysterious connection with him. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald became a foreshadowing of Harry's own destiny. Friendship poisoned, power corrupted, and the necessity of sacrifice. Rowling also carefully places Grindelwald's defeat within the broader history of the wizarding world. It was 1945, a symbolic year for both the Muggle and magical worlds when the flames of war consumed Europe. The parallel is striking. Just as Hitler fell, Grindelwald was captured and imprisoned. By linking the wizarding legend with real-world history, Rowling made the duel echo far beyond the boundaries of fiction. It suggested that darkness takes many forms but always demands confrontation. For Harry, this connection was sobering, reminding him that the battle against Voldemort was part of an ancient cycle where power and resistance clashed again and again. One of the most haunting aspects of the legend is Grindelwald's final moment, decades after his defeat, when Voldemort sought him out in Nurmengard. Here, Grindelwald, once a man of ambition, refused to betray Dumbledore's secret. He mocked Voldemort, declaring, "Kill me, then you will not win, you cannot win." It was as if the duel with Dumbledore had burned into Grindelwald a respect for his old friend, perhaps even a lingering love. For Harry, hearing this account confirmed that the duel had not only destroyed Grindelwald's plans, but had reshaped his soul. Defeat had humbled him, and his refusal to aid Voldemort was perhaps his last act of redemption. The duel also carries a symbolic message about the limits of power. Grindelwald, for all his brilliance, could not withstand Dumbledore, and Dumbledore, for all his might, was not free of scars. Power alone was not enough. It was choice that mattered. This echoed through Harry's own journey as he remembered Dumbledore's words, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." The duel, in this sense, was the ultimate illustration of that lesson. Both men were equals in ability, but one chose domination, while the other, though late, chose resistance. What makes this twist unforgettable is its emotional core. For Harry, the duel revealed that heroes are not born perfect. They are forged in pain, regret, and the willingness to confront what terrifies them most. Dumbledore's victory was not one of glory, but of necessity. The legend, stripped of its mythic glow, became human. It told Harry that even the strongest can falter, and that even a flawed man can rise to meet his destiny when the moment demands it. In the end, the duel of Dumbledore and Grindelwald stands as more than a historical event in the wizarding world. It is the reminder that friendships can break, that ambition can corrode love, and that redemption comes only through confrontation with one's past. For Harry, the revelation was both a shock and a gift, a truth that stripped away illusions, but also prepared him for his own duel, where he too would stand against someone who once shared his fate. And in that recognition, the legend became a mirror, not only for the boy who lived, but for every reader who understands the painful beauty of a bond broken by ambition and redeemed by sacrifice. Number 23. Cho Chang's betrayal. Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts was already burdened with turmoil, grief, and the suffocating atmosphere created by Dolores Umbridge, but there was another element of heartbreak woven into the narrative that made the Order of the Phoenix sting with even more intensity. The story of Cho Chang, the first girl Harry ever truly fancied, unfolded not as a tale of young romance fulfilled, but as a striking lesson about loyalty, pressure, and the fragility of human choices. Readers remember that tender kiss in the room of requirement, described with an awkwardness so real it made Harry relatable to every young reader, his lips colliding with hers, his heart pounding, the sense that at last he had stepped into the world of adolescent longing. Yet this sweet moment was only a prelude to a crushing betrayal that would mark Harry's emotional journey forever. Cho was never portrayed as an enemy. On the contrary, she seemed like someone Harry could trust, someone who carried her own grief after Cedric Diggory's death and who shared Harry's courage in standing against the Ministry's refusal to acknowledge Voldemort's return. When Dumbledore's army was formed, she eagerly joined, signalling her willingness to fight for what was right. For Harry, her presence meant more than just another ally. It felt like destiny pushing them together, an invisible thread connecting two teenagers who understood the weight of loss. But Rowling, with her instinct for emotional complexity, chose not to give Harry his fairy tale romance. Instead, she shaped a narrative twist that forced both him and the readers to confront the pain of misplaced trust. The true moment of fracture arrived when Marietta Edgecombe, Cho's close friend, exposed the secret of Dumbledore's army to Umbridge. It was not merely the act of betrayal itself that hurt, but the way it unfolded. Readers recall vividly that Marietta's face broke out in ugly, purple pustules, spelling the word sneak after Hermione's clever jinx on the parchment they had all signed. The visual cruelty of that punishment seared into the reader's mind the consequences of betrayal. For Harry, however, it wasn't only Marietta's weakness under pressure that mattered. It was the fact that Cho stood by her, defended her, and by extension placed herself in direct opposition to Harry's furious sense of justice. In that moment, what had once seemed like a promising bond between Harry and Cho shattered with a violence far more emotional than physical. Harry's reaction to the betrayal was written with the rawness of a teenager whose ideals have been bruised. He could not understand why Cho would side with someone who had jeopardized them all. In his mind, the world was divided into those who resisted Voldemort and those who did not, those who stood with him and those who stood against him. Cho's wavering, her insistence that Marietta was under pressure and should be pitied, was incomprehensible to Harry's moral clarity. "She's a sneak," Harry raged, his fury echoing the betrayal he felt, not only from Cho, but from the fragile web of trust that held Dumbledore's army together. The twist was more than a romantic disappointment. It was a moment that revealed Harry's growing struggle to understand the complexities of human loyalty. For readers, the betrayal stung in its realism. Many had expected Cho to become a steady supporter, perhaps even Harry's true companion through the trials of adolescence and war. Instead, Rowling reminded us that teenagers, however well-meaning, often buckle under authority and fear. Cho's loyalty to Marietta, though misguided, was also heartbreakingly human. In defending her friend, Cho was acting out of compassion, yet in doing so she alienated Harry and exposed the fissures in their fragile relationship. It was a bitter reminder that alliances, even in the face of great evil, are never as clear-cut as heroes hope. The betrayal of the Room of Requirement, often referred to as the exposure of Dumbledore's army, did not simply complicate Harry's romance, it deepened the tone of the entire novel. Up to that point, the DA represented a rare beacon of hope for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. It was a place where they could resist Umbridge's oppressive regime, where the younger students learned real defense, and where camaraderie blossomed despite the suffocating control of the Ministry. The destruction of that safe haven was devastating, not just for Harry, but for every member of the group. By attaching this downfall to Harry's first romance, Rowling intertwined personal heartbreak with political collapse, weaving tragedy into every layer of the story. The consequences of Marietta's betrayal, defended by Cho, spread like ripples through Harry's life. His already complicated emotions after Cedric's death now carried the weight of disillusionment. The boy who had finally dared to believe in affection, who had leaned into the dream of being cared for, now felt rejected in a new, painful way. The narrative turned this personal loss into a symbolic one. Even those closest to us can falter, and love cannot shield us from betrayal. In a book where trust is constantly tested, whether in Dumbledore's secrecy, Sirius's confinement, or the Ministry's denial, the betrayal through Cho reminded readers that the greatest wounds often come not from enemies, but from those we hope to love. Rowling's choice to deliver this twist through Cho was a stroke of narrative precision. Had any other DA member betrayed the group, the wound would have been sharp, but not personal. By tying Harry's emotional vulnerability to the downfall, she forced him to confront a truth that adults learn painfully. Attraction and trust do not always align. The betrayal was not merely about tactics or secrecy, it was about the collapse of a fragile bond built on shared pain. This added depth to Harry's development, pushing him closer to adulthood by forcing him to navigate the murky waters of conflicting loyalties. One of the most poignant aspects of this betrayal is the way Rowling layered it with Cho's grief. Readers must remember that Cho was mourning Cedric, the boy who had died only months earlier at Voldemort's hands. Her tears, her conflicted emotions, her tendency to bring up Cedric during conversations with Harry, all these were signs of a girl not yet ready to move forward. When she defended Marietta, she was perhaps also defending herself, her inability to sever ties with her past, her need for familiarity in a world that had spun out of control. This complexity made her betrayal even more believable. It was not the act of a villainess, but of a grieving teenager whose judgment faltered under the weight of fear and loyalty. The quote that encapsulates Harry's disillusionment comes when he recalls Hermione's words about Cho. "She's not weak, she's just very mixed up." That line resonates with the readers who see in Cho the embodiment of teenage fragility. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, framed the betrayal not as outright treachery, but as confusion, as the failure of a young girl under impossible circumstances. Yet for Harry, wounded and furious, such nuance was intolerable. His world demanded clarity, demanded that loyalty be proven through sacrifice. The gap between Harry's expectations and Cho's humanity became a chasm too wide to cross. As a narrative twist, the betrayal provided drama that was not only external but deeply internal. The DA's exposure accelerated the tension between Harry and Umbridge, setting the stage for the chaos that would soon engulf Hogwarts. At the same time, it hardened Harry emotionally, preparing him for the losses still to come. By suffering heartbreak in love, he gained the resilience necessary for the heartbreak of war. Readers could feel that Rowling was using this romantic subplot not as filler, but as a vital piece of character development, sharpening Harry's resolve and teaching him the price of misplaced trust. The betrayal also mirrored a larger theme running through the Order of the Phoenix, the failure of institutions and individuals to stand firm under pressure. Just as Fudge and the Ministry refused to believe in Voldemort's return, just as even Dumbledore distanced himself from Harry, so too did Cho reveal that even the people who seemed close could falter. This theme of isolation, of being abandoned or betrayed, carried Harry deeper into his role as the reluctant leader, the boy forced to shoulder burdens others could not. In Cho's wavering, the novel reflected the frailty of human courage. Readers often debate whether Rowling was too harsh on Cho, reducing her to a tool for Harry's heartbreak. Yet her role serves as a reminder that the world of Harry Potter is not a place of perfect allies or flawless love interests. It is a world where grief shapes choices, where fear distorts judgment, and where even the most promising connections can dissolve under scrutiny. Cho's betrayal stands as a symbol of the messy reality of adolescence, a reality where feelings and loyalties collide with devastating consequences. Ultimately, the twist of Cho and Marietta's betrayal left an indelible mark not only on Harry's personal journey, but on the reader's emotional landscape. It was a sobering moment in a book already charged with darkness, one that stripped away the illusion that love alone could conquer the complexities of human weakness. By forcing Harry and us to see Cho not as a flawless heroine, but as a flawed, grieving teenager, Rowling deepened the texture of her world. Betrayal, she reminded us, often comes not from villains cloaked in shadows, but from the fragile hearts of those we wish to trust. Number 24, Arthur Weasley and the Snake Attack. Of all the moments in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, few hit the reader with such raw intensity as the night Arthur Weasley was attacked by Nagini in the Department of Mysteries. The shocking element was not simply the attack itself, but the way it unfolded before Harry's eyes. Rowling crafted the scene to plunge the audience into a place of immediate dread, letting us experience the assault, as Harry did, through the consciousness of the serpent. This narrative choice turned a violent act into a revelation of something much darker, the living connection between Harry and Lord Voldemort. The attack became more than a plot device. It was a narrative hinge that reshaped how the characters and the readers understood Harry's relationship with the Dark Lord. Harry's vision began in the safety of Gryffindor Tower in the middle of the night. One moment he was surrounded by ordinary dormitory shadows, and the next he was deep in the bowels of the Ministry of Magic, inside the Department of Mysteries. But he was not himself. Rowling wrote, he was the snake, curled among the coils on the cold, polished floor, tasting the air, sensing the warm-blooded creature nearby. This shift of perspective was disorienting and terrifying. The sudden leap into Nagini's senses blurred the boundary between hero and monster, and Harry was powerless to resist the force dragging his mind into Voldemort's. This was the narrative brilliance, taking the ordinary tension of a bad dream and transforming it into evidence of a profound magical and psychological link. The use of Nagini as the vessel of this revelation heightened the terror. She was not just any snake but Voldemort's companion, bound to him as his servant and later revealed as one of his Horcruxes. Through Harry's vision, readers experienced the brutal physicality of her attack. He struck, his fangs piercing flesh, warm blood spurting into his mouth. These words carried a visceral weight that jolted the audience. Harry was forced to feel the satisfaction of the predator, the hunger of Nagini, and the rage of Voldemort. For the first time, he could not claim innocence in the violence. He was entangled in it, inhabiting it, and that terrified not only Harry but also those who loved him. The brilliance of this plot twist lay in its dual revelation. On the one hand, Arthur Weasley's life hung by a thread, throwing the Weasley family into a crisis that emphasized the real cost of Voldemort's return. On the other hand, Harry's vision pulled back the curtain on the depth of his psychic link with the Dark Lord. Up until then, the scar had been a symbol of pain, an occasional warning sign. Now it became a literal doorway. Readers like Harry began to wonder whether this doorway might swing both ways. If Harry could see into Voldemort's mind, could Voldemort see into his? Was Harry destined to become a vessel for the very evil he was fighting? Dumbledore's reaction to the attack underscored this new danger. When Harry was brought to the headmaster's office after the vision, Dumbledore avoided eye contact, moving quickly, speaking to others but never directly to Harry. The boy, who had long seen the headmaster as a source of reassurance, suddenly felt like an object of suspicion. The narrative tension sharpened because Dumbledore's silence suggested what Harry feared most, that he might not be entirely himself. Rowling allowed the readers to sink into Harry's isolation as he thought, "What if I'm the snake? What if Voldemort is inside me?" This doubt pushed the story into darker territory, adding layers of psychological conflict beyond the external battle with Death Eaters. The scene also elevated Arthur Weasley, a character often portrayed with warmth and comic fascination for Muggle inventions. Suddenly he became the target of Voldemort's most trusted creature, not because of his own prominence, but because of his role as a guard in the Department of Mysteries. The attack was brutal, leaving him seriously injured, his blood soaking the floor of the Ministry corridor. This shift gave weight to his character, showing that even the kindest and most ordinary wizard was not beyond Voldemort's reach. The juxtaposition of Arthur's humility with the savagery of the assault made the attack all the more jarring. What made the vision unforgettable was not only what Harry saw, but what he felt. The text allowed readers to experience the hot surge of Nagini's hunger and the exhilaration of the strike. Harry awoke thrashing, his hands clutching his own forehead, unable to separate his identity from the serpent's. In that moment, the line between victim and predator blurred. Rowling forced the audience to share Harry's horror. What if he was not merely connected to Voldemort, but already partly possessed by him? It was no longer a matter of battling evil outside of himself. The enemy was inside his very skin. The narrative shock rippled outward. For Ron and Hermione, Harry's confession about what he saw and felt became a test of loyalty. They believed him, but their fear was palpable. When Harry insisted, "I was the snake, I attacked your dad," the tension was nearly unbearable. His friends had to decide whether to treat him as a victim of dark magic or as a potential danger. Rowling crafted this dilemma to fracture Harry's sense of belonging even further, feeding the theme of isolation that dominates the fifth book. The attack was not only on Arthur Weasley's body, but also on Harry's trust in himself and his place among those he loved. The link to Voldemort also carried a deeper narrative purpose. For the reader, the attack foreshadowed the later revelation of the prophecy, which bound Harry and Voldemort together in a destiny neither could escape. But Rowling did not reveal that immediately. Instead, she planted the seed of doubt in Harry's mind, nurturing his fear that he was contaminated by the very evil he opposed. The Nagini attack was the perfect dramatic tool. It did not merely frighten Harry, but unsettled his entire perception of identity. Was he Harry Potter, the boy who lived, or was he gradually becoming Voldemort's puppet? Arthur's survival provided relief, but the damage to Harry's psyche remained. The St. Mungo's hospital scenes offered moments of levity and humanity, such as Gilderoy Lockhart's cheerful oblivion, but the shadow of Harry's vision lingered. Readers saw that even in a place of healing, Harry could not shake the sense that he had crossed a line. He carried not only the memory of Arthur bleeding on the ministry floor, but also the taste of blood in Nagini's mouth. These lingering impressions were reminders that the vision was not just a nightmare, but a real event witnessed through the enemy's senses. The attack also drew the Order of the Phoenix closer together, showcasing the reality of constant danger. Molly Weasley's breakdown at St. Mungo's highlighted the fragility of their resistance. She clutched Arthur's hand, her fear raw, and in that moment the cost of the war became personal for every reader. The Weasleys were no longer simply the warm, chaotic family that offered Harry refuge. They were a family under siege, and Harry's vision had dragged them into the line of fire. The emotional resonance deepened the bond between Harry and the Weasleys, while also making his feelings of guilt more profound. From a storytelling perspective, the use of the serpent's eyes symbolized the biblical imagery of temptation and evil. The snake has long represented corruption, and here Harry was not merely looking at it, but being it. Rowling tapped into a cultural archetype that magnified the unease. The attack suggested that Harry was being lured into a role he never wanted, that of the predator. This gave the narrative an almost mythic weight, aligning Harry's internal struggle with universal themes of good and evil, temptation and resistance, selfhood and corruption. The sequence also shifted the pacing of the novel. Up until that point, the story had been dominated by school life, by Dolores Umbridge's tyranny, and by Harry's growing frustration. The attack yanked the narrative out of Hogwarts and into the war beyond its walls. It served as a turning point, reminding readers that Voldemort's threat was not abstract but immediate, and that the Order's secret work at the Ministry was fraught with peril. By tying Harry's inner visions to a tangible act of violence, Rowling balanced psychological horror with physical stakes. Perhaps the greatest success of the twist was how it left readers with a gnawing question that could not be easily answered. Was Harry becoming more like Voldemort with each vision? Dumbledore's eventual explanation about their shared connection through the scar clarified some of the mystery, but at the time, the uncertainty was devastating. It placed the reader in Harry's shoes, asking whether the hero could trust himself. That tension carried through the remainder of the book, and even into the later volumes, where the question of Harry's identity remained at the forefront of the battle against Voldemort. The attack on Arthur Weasley was thus more than a violent episode. It was a carefully constructed narrative turn that intertwined character development, foreshadowing, and psychological tension. Through it, Rowling deepened the darkness of her story, forcing readers to confront the possibility that the hero might not be entirely separate from the villain. It was a moment that sharpened the stakes of the war, humanized the cost of resistance, and left the audience wrestling with the same fear that haunted Harry, the fear of becoming the very evil he was destined to destroy. Number 25, Lily Potter and Her Protection. Of all the turning points in the Harry Potter saga, few have the same weight and resonance as the revelation of Lily Potter's sacrifice. At the beginning of the series, we are told a simple, almost fairy tale-like fact. Harry's mother died to protect him. It is background information, almost a tragic footnote. Yet as the story progresses, this detail unfolds into one of the most profound narrative twists J.K. Rowling crafted. What seemed like mere tragedy becomes the cornerstone of the entire conflict, a plot device that transforms into a philosophical declaration that love, an intangible human quality, is capable of creating barriers stronger than the darkest of curses. The reader is led to this truth gradually, and when it is finally clear, it feels less like a revelation of fact and more like a moral awakening. The first time we see this twist in action is when Voldemort's curse rebounds on the knight in Godric's Hollow. James Potter is killed almost immediately, but Lily is given a choice. Voldemort offers her a chance to live if she will step aside. She refuses, and in that refusal lies the magic. But she refused to stand aside, Dumbledore explains later, and her refusal was all it took to give Harry the only protection Voldemort could not overcome. This detail is not framed as spellwork or incantation, but as the natural consequence of love freely given. The tragedy of Lily's death is reframed into the origin of Voldemort's first downfall. And the books remind us again and again that Harry is alive not because of a wand's power, but because of his mother's. Rowling deepens the twist by delaying its true significance. For the first book and much of the second, Lily's death remains background, a detail to set Harry apart as the boy who lived. But by the third and especially the fourth book, we begin to see how Lily's protection actively shapes Harry's destiny. In the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell cannot touch Harry without burning, a shocking moment that hints at magic deeper than anything studied in class. Dumbledore later explains, if there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. This explanation transforms Harry's survival into a layered mystery, not a stroke of luck, but a profound magical phenomenon. Rooted in Lily's final act. By the time we reach the Order of the Phoenix, the twist grows richer. Voldemort has returned in his physical form, and yet Harry still carries traces of his mother's sacrifice. Dumbledore explains why Harry must remain with the Dursleys despite the cruelty he suffers there. Petunia, Lily's sister, shares the same blood. That bond, sealed by Lily's death, keeps Voldemort at bay as long as Harry can call her house his home. While you can still call home the place where your mother's blood dwells, there you cannot be touched or harmed by Voldemort. This use of familial ties demonstrates that Lily's protection was not just an event of one night, but an enduring charm woven into Harry's very existence. It transforms the ordinary idea of family into something sacred, reinforcing the theme that bonds of love are shield and sanctuary. One of the most striking elements of this twist is its contrast with Voldemort's worldview. Tom Riddle builds his empire on fear, domination, and the denial of human attachment. He cannot grasp why Lily's sacrifice would hold any magical weight. The very concept of love is, to him, weakness. This blindness is ultimately his undoing. It is narratively elegant. Voldemort engineers his own defeat by failing to comprehend the one force that opposes him most completely. When Dumbledore tells Harry it is a power Voldemort knows not, he is not only describing an abstract ideal, but also foreshadowing the ultimate victory. The emotional power of Lily's sacrifice is heightened by the way Rowling reveals its echoes in Harry's own choices. When Harry later walks into the Forbidden Forest in the Deathly Hallows, prepared to let Voldemort kill him, the symmetry becomes clear. Lily's selfless act is mirrored in her son's. Harry accepts death so others may live, just as his mother accepted hers. This parallel completes the twist. The protection Lily gave Harry is not only magical, but moral. It teaches Harry and the reader that true strength comes from selflessness. When Harry survives Voldemort's killing curse again in the forest, the narrative comes full circle, showing that Lily's love was not an isolated miracle, but part of a larger truth about sacrifice and redemption. It is important to remember that Lily's protection was not inevitable. She had a choice. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape's memory reveals Voldemort's words, "Stand aside, girl, stand aside." Had she obeyed, the story would have ended differently. Her conscious refusal is what imbues her act with meaning. This moment transforms her from passive victim to decisive protector. It also adds complexity to her character, reminding us that her role is not merely symbolic. She was a witch capable of defiance, and her decision became the axis on which the entire story turns. Even small details reinforce the power of this twist. The motif of eyes, Harry's green eyes like Lily's, serves as a constant reminder of her presence within him. Characters repeatedly point this out, and it is not just sentimental. Those eyes symbolize the living trace of Lily's protection, a visual mark of the love that shapes Harry's destiny. When Snape tells Harry, "Look, that me," in his final moments, the resonance is overwhelming. Snape's lifelong devotion to Lily, Harry's inherited eyes, and the sacrifice that saved him all converge in that one request, binding together the personal and the cosmic. The brilliance of the twist is also in how Rowling ties it into the magical logic of her world. Readers accept charms, curses, and enchantments, but Lily's protection does not require wand work. It is primal magic, rooted in intent rather than incantation. By framing it this way, Rowling elevates love from a moral virtue to a tangible magical force. This gives the series its moral center. Unlike other plot devices, it never feels artificial because it flows naturally from both character and theme. Lily's choice is not just a plot mechanism, it is the embodiment of the story's values. The revelation of Lily's sacrifice also provides emotional closure to characters beyond Harry. For Snape, it is the defining tragedy of his life, the source of his remorse, and his double life as spy. For Petunia, it is a burden she can never escape, binding her to the nephew she resents. For Dumbledore, it is a reminder of the limits of his wisdom, that a simple act of love could accomplish what centuries of study could not. Each of these perspectives reinforces the weight of the twist, showing that Lily's death reverberates across the lives of everyone around her. Perhaps the most shocking reappearance of this protection comes in the Goblet of Fire, when Harry and Voldemort's wands connect in the graveyard and the echoes of Voldemort's victims appear. Lily's spirit emerges among them, urging Harry to hold on. "Your mother is coming. She wants to see you. It will give you time. You must get to the portkey." Even in spectral form, her role is to protect. For the reader, this is not just sentimentality, it is confirmation that Lily's presence is ongoing, that the love which once shielded Harry continues to reach across the boundaries of life and death. The narrative twist also gains depth when placed alongside the idea of Horcruxes. Voldemort seeks immortality through destruction, tearing apart his soul to anchor it in objects. Lily, by contrast, achieves a form of immortality through selfless sacrifice. Her protection lives on in Harry long after her death, outlasting Voldemort's dark magic. The juxtaposition is stark and deliberate. One pursues power and finds only fragility, while the other chooses love and achieves enduring strength. When Harry finally understands this truth, it redefines his view of himself. He is not merely the boy who lived because of a lucky accident or a technical loophole in magic. He is alive because of a choice rooted in love. The revelation gives his identity moral weight. It means his destiny is not random but shaped by values, and this awareness drives him to act with the same courage his mother showed. The twist elevates his survival from coincidence to calling. In the end, Lily Potter's sacrifice is more than backstory. It is the narrative seed from which the entire series grows. What begins as a tragedy becomes the thematic backbone, a twist that reshapes our understanding of magic, morality, and destiny. It is both plot mechanism and philosophical declaration, demonstrating that even in a world of wands and curses, the strongest defense is not a spell, but an act of love freely given. This is the revelation that surprises not with suddenness, but with depth, the moment when readers realize that the story they are following is not simply about defeating a Dark Lord, but about uncovering the most ancient and powerful truth of all. Number 26. Dumbledore's Army. When the group of students gathered in the room of requirement under Harry Potter's hesitant leadership, it seemed almost like a childish rebellion against the rules of Dolores Umbridge. These meetings in secret, hidden behind enchanted walls and summoned doors, were first portrayed as mischief rather than revolution. Yet in retrospect, the creation of Dumbledore's army was not simply a pastime for restless teenagers. It became the seed of resistance, an act of courage disguised as adolescent stubbornness. The choice to name the group after Albus Dumbledore, a figure already vilified by the Ministry, was a bold declaration of allegiance. It was also an act of faith, a statement that students too had the right to stand against tyranny, even if the world underestimated them. The importance of the Room of Requirement cannot be overstated in this transformation. It was not just a secret chamber, it was a symbol of adaptability and unity. Each time Harry led a lesson, the walls provided exactly what was needed: cushions for practicing spells, books on defense, and space large enough for dozens of students to practice shield charms without harming one another. What began as laughter when Neville Longbottom stumbled, or when Seamus Finnegan produced sparks instead of flames, evolved into disciplined training sessions. Under Harry's guidance, spells once recited in boredom during class became weapons of survival. As Rowling describes, they were all becoming proficient in one way or another, the room echoing with the sounds of incantations and the clash of spells. This was no longer mere study. It was preparation for war. The Ministry's refusal to acknowledge Voldemort's return gave the group a greater sense of urgency. The students were aware that denial was not safety, and their only defense would be the skills they mastered themselves. For characters like Luna Lovegood and Ginny Weasley, the army provided not only magical knowledge but also confidence. Ginny's bat bogey Hex, once a family joke, became legendary in these circles, earning her respect even from older students. Neville, whose clumsiness had been a running theme since the first book, began to emerge as a determined fighter, his failures replaced by quiet persistence. Neville had improved beyond all recognition, Rowling notes, signalling the deeper narrative arc that would later culminate in his heroism during the Battle of Hogwarts. The irony lies in the way authority figures dismissed the army. To Umbridge, the gatherings were a violation of order, a breach of her iron grip on the school. To the Ministry, they were little more than disobedient schoolchildren, causing mischief. No one outside the circle realized the true weight of what was happening in that hidden room. These children, derided for their naivety, were building bonds and skills that would become crucial in the war. The underestimation of youth became one of the most striking narrative twists. The weakest, the youngest, and the most ignored would rise to meet the darkness. Harry's role as a teacher is perhaps the most subtle but effective element in this shift. Having been taught through experience, facing trolls, basilisks, dementors, and Death Eaters, Harry translated his survival into instruction. He was not the most academically gifted. Hermione often corrected him, adding context and theory. Yet the group followed him because he embodied what they wanted to become, someone who had already stood face to face with Voldemort and lived. When Harry taught the Patronus Charm, a spell far beyond the standard curriculum, the awe of his peers was not only in the silver stag that emerged, but in the belief that they too could summon light against darkness. As Cho Chang whispered, after producing her first flicker of silvery mist, "It's because we're learning from you." The army also redefined the meaning of loyalty at Hogwarts. Students from different houses, though not all, came together in an act of solidarity. Ravenclaws like Luna stood alongside Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs such as Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott, breaking through traditional house divisions. Slytherins were absent, but that absence itself reinforced the dramatic tension. The line between those who resisted Voldemort and those who sympathized with him grew clearer. The shared secrecy created intimacy among the members, friendships forged not by house colors, but by the willingness to risk punishment for the sake of freedom. The laughter, the nervous mistakes, the late-night meetings all became part of a narrative that humanized them as ordinary teenagers while foreshadowing their extraordinary destinies. The climax of this subplot revealed itself during the events of the Department of Mysteries. When Harry, driven by visions of Sirius's suffering, led a small group of Dumbledore's army into battle, the choice seemed reckless, yet it was also the ultimate test of their training. Facing Death Eaters in the Ministry's shadowy halls, the students who had once stumbled over incantations now fought with real determination. Hermione's clever use of jinxes, Ron's protective loyalty, Luna's unexpected calmness, and Neville's bravery, even when gravely injured, were proof that the army had transformed them. Though they were beaten and scarred, they did not collapse in fear. Their resilience forced the Order of the Phoenix to recognize that these were not just children, they were soldiers in the making. The true narrative brilliance of Dumbledore's army, however, lies in its re-emergence during the final book. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione hunted Horcruxes, it was Neville Longbottom who resurrected the army at Hogwarts. This was the moment the storyline revealed its hidden depth. Neville, once the weakest link, became the leader in Harry's absence. He orchestrated acts of sabotage against the Carrows, the cruel Death Eater professors, and kept alive the flame of resistance among the students. As Rowling writes, the DA had never disbanded. It kept meeting, kept fighting. The transformation was complete, what began as youthful. Rebellion matured into organized defiance. The Battle of Hogwarts immortalized the army's significance. As Death Eaters stormed the castle, it was not just the Order or the professors who defended the grounds, it was the students who had once practiced in the Room of Requirement. Padma and Parvati Patil fought alongside their peers, Seamus Finnegan ignited explosive spells that rocked the corridors, and Ginny refused to be sidelined despite her mother's pleas. The army provided not only manpower, but a spirit of defiance that infected the entire school. They were no longer apprentices but warriors, their wands blazing against the onslaught of darkness. Neville's defining moment, the slaying of Nagini with the sword of Gryffindor, is the ultimate payoff of this subplot. It was not Harry who struck that decisive blow, but the boy who once struggled to remember passwords and lost his toad on the first day of school. This was the culmination of the army's journey, the least likely hero rising to meet destiny. The growth of Neville reflected the growth of the entire group, demonstrating that bravery is not reserved for the chosen one, but can be nurtured in anyone willing to stand and fight. Equally significant was the way Dumbledore's army offered readers a mirror to real-world movements of resistance. Ordinary people, underestimated and often dismissed, can become the backbone of rebellion. Rowling framed this transformation within a school, making it both accessible and powerful. The army was a metaphor for the resilience of youth and the ability of communities to rise against authoritarianism. In naming themselves after Dumbledore, they claimed not only his authority but also his ideals, carrying forward the belief that truth and courage matter even when governments insist otherwise. The personal transformations of individual members added texture to the story. Luna Lovegood, mocked for her eccentricities, found belonging in the army, her insight and unconventional wisdom proving valuable. Ginny Weasley shed the image of a younger sibling, becoming a formidable witch in her own right. Even characters like Zacharias Smith, who doubted and questioned Harry's leadership, inadvertently highlighted the seriousness of the enterprise. The army was not about perfection, it was about resilience, disagreement, growth, and unity despite flaws. This realism made their eventual triumph all the more compelling. What makes this subplot a brilliant narrative twist is not simply its practical impact on the war, but the way it reshaped the reader's perception of power. Until then, the story largely revolved around Harry, Dumbledore, and Voldemort. The army shifted the focus outward, reminding us that change does not come from a single chosen figure, but from collective courage. When students who were once background characters stood shoulder to shoulder with heroes, the series broadened its emotional resonance. Suddenly, the fate of the wizarding world felt like the responsibility of many, not just one.